Hello and welcome to the Outdoor Gibbon podcast, episode 24. Well, it's quite a fitting episode because actually we are now in the year of 2024. So perfect timing really to start the year off with a fantastic guest. I managed to get hold of, it's only taken 12 months, Byron Pace. He's a busy man to track down and to actually tie down to an audio desk or even a desk anywhere in the UK, because most of the time he's been travelling and doing a lot of filming and documentaries all over the world. But anyway, we have that coming up in this show a bit later on. As with all New Year's, I'm sure everybody's been out there and they've made their resolutions and plans and things to do and what they want to achieve this year. I think I haven't really made that many. I've still got to just nail this Chinese water deer down. It's proven a bit of a tricky one at the moment, just timing wise, really getting down the country because obviously there's none in Scotland. I haven't made any of the plans at the moment. As always, the year will start, and before I know it, I'll be halfway through, and quick enough we'll be at the end again. I think the only thing that's set in stone is a trip down to the Stalking show in Staffordshire in April to catch up with people. So this interview that you're about to listen to, it has wide and varied topics. Initially talking about the Into the Wilderness podcast that Byron and his brother set up, moving on to some of the filmography he's done and other parts in Modern Huntsman. Then we go on to talk about his latest project called Paid in Blood, movement of elephants from around in Africa because of drought. It's quite poignant. They're obviously having drought over the last few years, and if you look out the window at the moment, the weather for January has probably been the wettest it's ever, well, December, January, I should say, has been the wettest it's ever been. Just on the news today, more flooding, and this time it's not just in Scotland, it's covered the whole country, and I think we even touch on that, power outages and stuff. So sit back, enjoy this podcast, and any feedback, let us know. Hello and welcome to the Outdoor Gibbon podcast. Finally, after a long time, I have managed to get onto this podcast the one and only Byron Pace. Most of you will know him from things like Into the Wilderness podcast, The Modern Huntsman, and you'll have seen him on other platforms and videos and filmography. Welcome, Byron.
Thank you. Thank you for persevering with me for probably what has been a year, I would guess, to get me a desk in my own country.
I was going to say.
That's where I am right now, so I'm at home.
Well, as I say, you couldn't really have got this any better. I think we are on the second day of 2024, so literally the start of the year, we've managed to pin you down to get this recorded.
Which is good because I think probably January is the only full month of this year that I'm going to be home, so you've done well.
Well, I think you've been fairly busy. So obviously, a lot of people will know you from sort of, I think, how it all started, the Into the Wilderness podcast.
Yeah.
So just take us back to how did people ask how I start my podcast? How did you guys start yours?
The podcast started, I think, about 8 years ago. And it coincided with me starting a film production company with my brother, Daryl, who we worked together for quite a number of years. And it was actually his idea to start a podcast. He was a big podcast listener. And at that time, if you cast your mind back to 8-9 years ago, in the UK, certainly, there weren't really any outdoor podcasts. There was
not
at all.
Nothing. No.
There was... there was a handful in the States, but nothing like what there is now. And there was one or two across Europe. It was really an empty space. And so he said, well, why don't we do that? We're in that arena anyway because we're filming it. I've been involved in the outdoors field sports world for a long time, since in my late teens, writing for different publications. We're always meeting really interesting people. Why don't we have a podcast? Okay, let's do it, Daryl. Had never listened to a podcast before.
Well, I think
really it was him that made it happen.
I was going to say, I think your podcasts were what pretty much kept me sane moving to Scotland. The 9.5 hours of driving.
Scotland's not that bad.
No, it was the 9.5 hours driving up and down the motorway most weekends, and I would download a whole load of your podcasts onto the iPad, bang them in the truck, and it was almost like you guys were just sat in the car with me, and the fantastic guests you had all the way up, all the time.
Would that be near the start?
That was right near the start, yeah.
Wow, yeah. I cringed to actually think about listening back to some of those early podcasts, but everyone has to start somewhere. And that's where it started for us, and we worked together both on the podcast and on the film side for many years, and then eventually we ended up parting ways. My brother's now a policeman up in Aberdeen, and he has a family and a beautiful little niece who I'm actually seeing tomorrow. But in the last couple of years, I've just we pared our business right back down to just being me and the work that I'm doing now.
Yeah, because you got to a point where you were you had a lot going on. You had the Into the Wilderness podcast. You were doing stuff on some of the Scottish estates up here. You had a whole load of merchandise and things like that going out.
Yeah, I mean, that again, Daz was a big driver of a lot of the ancillary stuff because he loved that kind of shit. Most of the merch stuff was his idea. The coffee was kind of his stuff, and we ran with it. But also, we were building a bit. At that time, we were building a business. So, what does that business look like? The core of it was filming in field sports primarily, and then we had a podcast which wasn't really monetized at all at the start, and it's still, even to this day, even after many, many years and a reasonable listenership, it's still incredibly hard to monetize podcasts. And then all of those little components that we were doing, including guided hunting, all just added to making it viable, because it was we found it very difficult, and it still to this day is very difficult. Even if you're very good, if you do one thing, if you're just, I say just in inverted commas, just a photographer, or just a filmmaker, or just a writer, I've always found it very hard to make just one of those things work, which is why I do a lot of things probably not as well as I should, because I do a lot of things rather than just doing one. Although one of my focuses in the last sort of 2 to 3 years has been to pare some of that down and really focus on the thing that I want to do more than anything else, which is making films. So I have started to dedicate much more of the time that I have to that. I don't do a lot of writing anymore. I used to write a hell of a lot. I mean, there was a time, there probably was a period of about 5 years where you'd struggle to find somebody who was writing more words in UK field sports publications than I was. I doubt there was, if there was anyone, there was maybe one or two people.
I was going to say, you always used to be in Field Sports magazine and things like that with
yeah,
articles.
And Sporting Rifle was a big one, and then I wrote in Countryman's and a number of other publications around the world as well, all in field sports. I was a rifle reviewer for many years. And then I kind of drifted away from that, like that sort of high volume writing, and it was a hell of a lot of fun. But I'm talking like when I was in my mid-20s, so it served a purpose, and it was fulfilling something that I was really passionate about at the time, because I love to hunt and I love to fish, and I loved rifles. I still love rifles. I just now I can geek out about camera gear more than I can about the latest guns.
So let's just drag you back, because a question I ask every guest on here is sort of what's your earliest memory and how did you get into field sports? Because it's kind of everybody has a different sort of entry point.
Yeah, that's pretty easy for me. That was my dad. When I was my earliest memories are shooting crows with an air rifle in the Black Isle up in Scotland, on a farm. I can't remember the name of the farm, but the farmer, sadly, he passed away many years ago. His name was John Gregor, and he let my dad come there and shoot rabbits.
Oh, fantastic!
And shoot crows, and it was a typical like northern Scottish farm. Cattle. I can't remember. There was definitely cattle. I can't remember there being any sheep. And a very typical farmer in that part of Scotland as well. So, as rough but equally as kind as they come.
Yes.
And I was a tiny little kid. Yeah, I'm like, I mean, by the time I was 6 years old, I had moved to where kind of in the area that I live now. So this is from like 3 to 5.
Okay.
And those memories crawling through the long grass in my onesie camo outfit with a plastic retractable knife in my pocket, crawling up behind my dad to go and shoot rabbits was that. And then in the same area, so we're talking like north of Inverness, in the hills above Loch Ness, pike fishing in very small little lochs, throwing spinners and catching pike. So those are my very, very earliest memories doing things in the sort of field sports arena.
Oh, fantastic! So yeah, real sort of young age, getting in there and being introduced to it
Very
all.
much. Yeah, no, very much. It soon became the case that there was really nothing else that I wanted to do. It was, I mean, through my as soon as I got into the teenage years that allows you to have a bit of independence, like pre being able to drive, but that sort of period leading up to there, I if I wasn't at school or swimming, I used to do a lot of competitive swimming at the time. I was probably on the river fishing, or I was up on some of the farms that I still hunt to this day, near where my parents live, hunting rabbits or roe deer or whatever
Oh,
it might be.
fantastic! Because obviously that probably ties into why some of the guests you've had on the podcast over the years. It's always been a connection. I think it's not like it's difficult to have that conversation about hunting and fishing when you actually do it. It's so much easier to be able to interact with a guest that enjoys doing it.
Yeah, and that was very much a focus of the podcast at the beginning. It was never going to be a hunting podcast, which is why we picked the name Into the Wilderness. It was supposed to be basically a love of the outdoors and a love of nature. But in the early years, a lot of the guests were people who did do a lot of hunting, and we talked about hunting and hunting ethics and that sort of thing. And that definitely changed over the years. Not because I don't want to talk about it anymore. I just have found other deeper interests in the conservation space, where I'm talking to, uh, where more of the conversations are about the sustainable use of natural resources as a whole, not just specifically in the hunting arena. On that plays an important role. And you see that particularly where I spend a lot of time in Africa, which is a lot of the conversations that I have. But much bigger picture than that. And a lot of that has taken me, a lot of those conversations and people I've interviewed have started being at home and then ended up being abroad because I spend so much time abroad filming. But this year, as you probably saw, I came back to kind of where it all began, but with a higher level of production, which is kind of always my aim when I'm taking on new projects, is to try and raise the bar from whatever it was I did last time. Was I did this whole series within the podcast called The British Uplands, which was this sort of deep investigation into the British Uplands. But again, it wasn't really hunting focused at all. It just so happens that the British Uplands, there's a lot of field sports activities that take place. And so a huge amount of the topics that we discussed, from tree planting to peatland restoration to how rivers are being restored, to predator control, are all impacted or all affect or are all done by areas that are used for field sports. So there was a kind of subtle connection there, and that was quite deliberate, because I think one of the kind of failures of the field sports community in trying to have conversations about what we do in a public arena is that you go there with the flag flying high. It's like, and that's not about like hiding who you are. It's just like, I'm here and I have an agenda and I'm here to defend my position, rather than saying like, come into my world, like open the door. And it's a slightly different approach.
I completely agree with you on that, and I think you're probably taking it a different route into that, but actually opening it up and actually trying to introduce people to the whole picture. Whereas exactly, you just hit the nail on the head. The sports community at the moment, they kind of hold a shield up and go, nobody's going to break through our barrier. And I think that's very defensive to anybody we don't open the conversation, do we?
No, and it's always in defense of something. So
Yes.
if you look at that series that we did, well, for a start, I brought in someone who is not involved in that world or whatever. And I hired an editor who is ex-BBC and currently a lecturer at a university up in Scotland to check my bias. Because there's so little point putting out, you can put out the best series, podcast or film series or whatever you want in the world that's driven with an agenda from a shooting organization or any organization for that matter. But if that is the angle that you're coming from, you're coming there with this massive baggage of biases. So if your aim is to try and get people to come with you on a journey of discovery so that we can discuss and talk about, hang on a second, well, maybe that isn't a good idea, or, damn, maybe I've been wrong this whole time. Maybe this is another concept that I need to think about how we manage our landscape. You're never going to do that if it's coming from a place that has an agenda. I think there's a huge danger, and I've seen this with a number of like people and or organizations, old and new, where it starts with absolutely the best of intentions, and the best of intentions are still there, but they become propaganda machines. Yeah. And they don't even realize that they've become propaganda machines, and they get patted on the back because they're reinforced. And I'm trying to be conscious of it, but you get patted on the back when it reinforces things that people believe in, and then you start to drink the Kool-Aid rather than being continually critical. Like if you look at that the Upland series, like I don't know what percentage of it was actually related to any hunting stuff, but it was maybe 30%.
Yeah, no,
like
absolutely.
The rest was way bigger picture stuff, and that's actually what's more important.
It is more
important.
Yeah. That's gonna protect the whole field sports society rather than just the hunting part, because actually people can connect with that easier. Your BBC viewer, for example, who sits there and watches one of the wildlife shows, suddenly realizes, oh, there is more to it than just going out and shooting the countryside up.
Yep, totally. And then you bring in, and we the sort of field sports have definitely done this. So this wasn't exactly me breaking new ground, but you bring in voices like Tim Adams, who was previously at River Cottage, and now he's also up in Scotland now. Speaks so brilliantly, and he's a game chef, and he's massively passionate about this incredible resource that we have on our doorstep, and is able to give his point of view because he's a chef, and people relate to that because it's food. And that was a nice little inroads. And Sarah Roberts, my friend who's a journalist, again, like she's a more marine sharks world than she is terrestrial, and doesn't hunt or fish or do anything like that. She just was there with a curious mind, and she was just asking the questions that you ask if you're a journalist. And I think that's why we came up with a really nice outcome off the back of that, which was very listenable. Like I had somebody from the RSPB actually email me off the back of that series to say there was stuff in there I didn't know. You really opened my eyes. It was really well done, really balanced. More of this stuff, it would be great.
That's fantastic.
I'll take that for the win.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. And especially if you've got another big organisation like that turning up and going, yeah, we tell everybody we're the best at this, but actually we've just learnt something from it. You can't ask for better, can you?
Yeah, it's cool, it's cool. And that's all I want from any of this stuff, is really to be able to bring people into a room that wouldn't normally sit in the room.
Yes.
Be able to have a civil conversation. And I think, generally, as is often the case, in the conservation world, in any part on any continent, clashing groups often actually want the same outcome. It's just that they disagree in a very polar way often about how to go about it.
I think so, and I think it's the defensive reaction, just a human nature. We'll all jump with a very defensive way when we're trying to defend something, and I think unfortunately a lot of people then they get very stubborn and their backs get up, and you never go forward. You just sit there and always trying to get your point across.
Yeah, no, totally. It is, which is frustrating, and we need to move past that from both sides. It can be very difficult to have a discussion with anybody who has an incredibly entrenched view and isn't willing to give ground, or willing. In my mind, one of the most important things as a journalist is you have to be willing to be wrong.
Yes. Yeah. You basically have to.
You have to be prepared that maybe, you're going to find out something that is going to make you change your position, because you've just suddenly got a piece of information that you didn't have before, and now you have to say, I believe this thing because this was the information I have. Now I've learned this. Do you know what? I wasn't wrong before because I was making it with the information I had, but my position has now changed because I have a more complete view. Or at the very least, I've learned something which is now making me question what I previously thought.
No, absolutely.
And that critical mindset we all need to have, like on both sides of the fence.
And I think that is exactly right. And unfortunately, until the shooting community needs to actually act together and work together, because that's the biggest. We're falling apart from the inside, and then it creates more stress, because the outside world gets to see that this community is not one anyway.
No, I don't really know how to solve that, to be honest.
No, but I think the work,
I don't know, but
the work you're doing, at least it allows it to come from a different angle, which then allows people to look in and go, "Oh, well, hang on a minute, yeah, there is something else going on here."
Yeah, and we have to be willing to. It's a hard balance between holding on to the things that are important, but also be willing to change. And understand that sometimes the win is getting ahead of change that is going to be forced upon you anyway.
Yeah.
So take some voluntary action, which means that you're in control, rather than waiting 5 years thinking you can hold on to a position that's absolutely not tenable, and then you're going to lose anyway, and you have zero control. Like, I can see, and people, my gamekeeping friends will hate on me for this, but I can see that it's already happened in some places. I can see that happening with the snaring position.
Yep.
It's a very controversial subject. There's some places, I don't think you can't even do it in Wales anymore.
No, Wales, it's been completely banned, and it's currently in review, I think,
here. And I totally get it. It's you don't want to, it's just one thing after the next. Like, what's the next thing that you lose, which was a component of ways that we used to manage the countryside. But I think if people were to take an honest long-term view on it, I don't know if it's something that's savable. And that is no statement about whether it should or shouldn't happen. I'm just making that comment from a public perception point of view. I think even if you had the best orators to talk about it and how it can be used as a tool and a restraining device rather than a snare, I'm not sure whether the public are going to buy into that. And ultimately, the politicians don't care. The politicians care about getting votes. And we've seen that time and time again. They don't really care. I've become incredibly cynical about politics the last couple of years, but I really don't believe that the politicians, generally speaking, care at all about what the truth is. I think they care about getting their seat back more than anything else.
You're absolutely right. It's bums on seats for them, and if they can win a group of people over that will keep them in, then they'll sing whatever you want them to sing.
They will. Yep. They will keep singing that song, and then they'll change that song. If suddenly the tide changes, we see it too often. It's a very obvious statement. I think generally speaking, the public have lost faith in politicians. I think we're in an era right now of probably the largest number of completely useless politicians in both all of our parliaments in the UK than in my whole life, which is really sad.
Unfortunately, that has a massive effect on the management of everything from the whole of the countryside, which we're talking about, the country sports, just down through everything we do. Everything.
Yeah, I mean, just you look at flooding. We've just seen massive flooding in the country. We really need leadership to help solve some of these problems. I tell you, a great piece of leadership would be don't build houses on floodplains.
Well, the
fact that councils, and I realize this is slightly off topic from the countryside, but it's all linked because this is all rivers that start in the uplands, and a lot of those uplands are managed or were in the past, if they're not now, managed as hunting estates. So we're talking about tree planting and contour planting and drainage of the moorland from farming back in the 70s, not for draining of grouse moors, which was often misquoted. So it is all linked alongside big shifts in climate patterns, which means that we're seeing larger volumes of rain over shorter periods of time. But leadership would say, like, you look at Brecon, which is near where I live. It's actually where I went to high school. There's a place called River Street. Funny enough, it's on a river. It has flooded probably 8 times that I can think of in my lifetime, and this time was probably the worst. And it happened after, and I might be wrong on this number, but I think it was a 13+ million pound flood defense system.
That's
so
right.
not an insignificant amount of money. It failed the second time the river flooded.
Yep.
Don't put those people back in those houses.
No.
They could have used that money that they used to build those flood defenses to put those people who live in those houses in another part, like build new houses for them or subsidize new housing for them and leave that place for the river to do what rivers do, which is flood. And you look up and down our country. No, and this isn't just picking on Scotland. This is that I live here. It's the same is true all over the UK. We've historically and continue to build houses on floodplains and then wonder why they get flooded. And then we all pay for it. If you don't live in a floodplain, I don't know if you live in a floodplain. I don't. I live on the side of a hill.
I live on top of a hill.
My house insurance. Yeah, you live on that's a much better place to live. Like we all pay for it with the insurance on our houses.
Yep. Yeah.
Even though you wouldn't think about it directly. You're not in a flood risk area. Those insurance companies are still having to pay for those houses to be fixed, which means all of our insurances are going up. So it's all linked, and that kind of difficult leadership, as one example, just because it's something that happened 3 weeks ago, we don't see in this country at all.
No, they won't look. They won't look at that. We'll look at something completely different, and we'll forget about the domestic issue, and we'll look at another
how
problem.
we can send funds for aid in a country. Meanwhile, we've got people, drowning. There's been like 6 people drowned.
It's been ridiculous
in the last 6 months. It's been unbelievable.
Well, I was out stalking on the hills in the first storm, the red weather warning, because I was up in the Angus Glens. I think we were trying to organise getting a podcast recorded with you.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And the devastation.
I had no power, I think, that time. That's why I couldn't do it. I had no power.
That's your Jenny had burnt out or something like that.
Yeah, it did bloody had, which I fixed. Yeah, thought I'd fixed yesterday, and now, much to my disappointment, it's still not working.
Oh, anyway. No. But again, you look at it and you just look at the main A90 was closed for 5 days because of the flooding and the damage. And you think that's a main trunk road. Nothing got up to Aberdeen because of that, and that there were no diversions. And you talk about Brecon. Everything went through Brecon.
I know, poor bloody sods who live there.
Every Arctic, everything you could think of was trundling through that tiny place, and it's crazy. It
is, but a lot of that, and we can get back to other topics after this, but. I look at that a lot of that reason that road was closed was because of the bridge at Finhaven.
That's right.
Which is the South S that runs underneath it. Now, near my parents' so that's I don't know when that bridge was built, but it's a fairly modern bridge. It's very standard. You see them all over the place with those sort of medium-sized rivers. They're just basically concrete platforms that were put across with hard, angular edge cast concrete bases on either side. I don't even think there's no middle support in there because it's not very long. And of course it's going to fail over time. Like you look at it and you just think this is such a shit design. And then near where my parents live, or where I grew up, is an old railway bridge that has long since been decommissioned when they reduced the number of lines. It was a line that used to run, I think, from Brecon into Edsall, and I don't know where it went once it went past Edsall. But it was that line that would have then hooked up to Montrose. So there's been no tracks on it the whole time we've lived there, so for like 35 years. But the pillars for that bridge are still there. And the pillars for those bridge were probably built 100 years ago, or maybe longer. Haven't been maintained because there's no railway on it in the same period of time whenever they were lifted, I think, which was back in the 70s. That bridge is still standing.
Yep.
And I bet you that bridge is as good as the day that it was built, because I can see it, and you see where the foundations go into the river. So I don't know. I'm not a structural engineer. I can't say for sure. But you look at it and you thought, this was really well freaking designed.
Well, they thought about it. Yeah.
They really did. Even the shape of it. It's shaped like a boat.
It's designed to get the water around.
To cut water. Yeah. To cut water around it. And you look at it's just ridiculous. And you see that so much with this. The sort of the modern age of quick building and not taking 100 or 1,000 year view on it, and that is something that does go back to conservation. I was actually, when I released the Upland series, I managed to wrangle a spot on the 9 show, which is a Scottish current affairs program recorded out of Glasgow. And I can't remember exactly what the question was they asked me at the end, but it was something about what are my what do I see as the biggest issues around conservation in Scotland? And that was one of the things I said, was that the problem is that we as a society and as the people making decisions and those people with the funds to make things happen, but particularly political decision making, the time horizon is too short. It's a 4 to 5 year time horizon, not a 10 to 100 to 1,000 year time horizon.
No, absolutely.
If you want conservation to work, you're delusional if you think it's going to work in a political cycle. You need at least a decade, and that's not even long enough. We need to take the mindset of a lot of sort of native populations' views about how they looked at the land at the time, if you were to go back, which was sort of 7 generations.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
How do my actions now impact the 7th generation from now?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we took that view, we'd be in a way better position than we are today.
It's almost like you look at the whole rewilding and replanting schemes and the trees and everything like that. They're not. Most of the trees that are planted in Scotland, unfortunately, are planted for a cash crop. They're 30-year cycle. That means that somebody's planning their pension out of planting some trees, unfortunately.
Probably with a tax break.
With a tax break, no inheritance tax and all the rest of it. But again, everything then suffers. So we can drag this round. The complete change now we've had in the Scottish deer season. There are no stags out of season, or no male deer is out of season. But that's not actually dealing with a population growth. That's just something that ticks a box.
It's freaking wild. Like when because I've been out away so much the last couple of years. With some things I've been a little out of the loop. Like I know that was on the table. I didn't know fully when it had been implemented, and then I found out recently, or this year, it had been implemented. And I read some of the deer reports, when it came out, and I was having conversations with the likes of Dr. Lindsay Sivwright, who's big in that world. So I have kind of been part of those debates, or know kind of what's going on. But when you hear that they implement something like this, and you know that the justification for them implementing that is to reach these higher targets for the number of red deer particularly, I mean, it's all deer species in Scotland, red deer is the focus, to reduce the population of red deer in Scotland. It's just laughable, because did any of those people know anything about population dynamics? Because you basically need to do high school biology to know that if you want to control the populations of species, you control the females. It has nothing to do. It has almost nothing to do with the population of males. And yet they've made this call on the back of total bullshit. Frankly, that's what they've done. And how do you articulate this to the public? You won't be able to, because the public, why should they care that much about it?
Exactly.
But what we've had is we've had a government supposedly acting in the best interest of the people that vote them in. And what I'm about to say isn't a judgment on whether we should or shouldn't cull more deer. So just put that aside for 1 second. But they've implemented a policy that is based not on science.
Absolutely.
And is based on lies. Let's open the male season because it's going to reduce populations. It's fundamentally not true. And that is what we're dealing with here. And so that is, when you see things like that happen, it doesn't give you a lot of faith in the right decisions being made.
No, not at all. And actually, it's kind of scary. The nicest part was to see that many of the estates and the deer managers are singing from the same book, and it's like there's no point in carrying on shooting a stag after the rut when they're in such poor condition. We need to give them a chance to recover. However, don't get me wrong, there are scrupulous sporting agents out there that think, well, it's another quick buck I can make. I can keep shooting stags for longer.
Yeah, and there is something to be discussed in that, and this doesn't sit particularly well with a lot of traditional estates, but I think some of the more progressive-minded stalkers and deer managers would be willing to talk about the fact that we are shooting a lot of stags in terms of meat production and food into the food chain at the worst time of year.
Absolutely.
They're in the middle of the rut, and then that, like, right until when the old season disappeared. I don't want to eat that stuff. Like, I want to eat it 2 months before, and then not again until the season opened.
Yes.
Like July the following year. And so there is an issue there. And like you speak to the game dealers, they're saying we're getting the vast majority of our, or a large proportion of our protein intake of carcasses during the months of September and October, during the rut, which is when a lot of hunting's going on. And I totally get it. And it's super exciting to hunt at that time of year. It's also easier because the males have one thing on their mind. And the clients coming in, that's what they want to do. They want to go and hunt stags. And it is all part of the management system. It all plays a role. However, we're living in a time now where we have to think about the whole cycle. And the whole cycle is once that animal is dead, it goes into the food chain. And that wasn't a problem. And I'm regurgitating information here rather than pretending like I have a deep-seated knowledge on this. This is just from speaking to other people about it. Part of the problem that we have now and why this is compounded at the same time, it's kind of happened almost at exactly the same time that the Scottish government decided they wanted an extra 100,000 deer through the system, is we've left Europe. And whereas before it was very easy to send that venison for that 6, 7, 8 weeks maybe, that we don't really have a palate for. And they sent it to Europe and they made it into sausages.
Absolutely.
And salamis and stuff, which is great. And it's great for that. But we don't eat much of that by comparison to the Europeans. So now what do you do with all of that venison that is shot at a time of year where you're not actually getting great value on the carcass because they're not in great fettle? Because they're not really eating anymore because they've got something else in their mind. And I also get that. So that is a positive of the change in the season. It's just that is not the reason that the season was changed.
No, and exactly. And to be honest, the game dealers didn't help us because obviously during that stag season, you go from £1.35 a kilo, and I think we dropped to 90 pence a kilo for a stag. It's almost to the point of by the time you're trying to get those beasts away, there's no value in that venison. Yet you still go into a lot of shops and things like that, pick up a piece of venison. Oh, it's not from Scotland, it's New Zealand venison. Excellent.
Yeah, I asked a game dealer about this. I said, I'm sure I hear that you guys get a lot of heat from the stalkers who are bringing in carcasses. Like, why are you giving me nothing for my venison? We're being told shoot more, and like, why? What's the point? I'm getting nothing for these carcasses. And of course, well, one in a bigger picture, not just talking about the stags. Of course, that is going to happen.
Yep.
We have a drive pushed by government to shoot more deer. What do you think is going to happen? Basic supply, demand. You should know this at high school. It's going to depress the prices. Like, the prices can only go one way unless it coincides with investment, which should come from government. If this is what they want to happen, investment should come from government for marketing for venison to make it, one, more affordable, but also make people realize that it's this amazing resource that we have as a country. Of course, they're not doing that. The game dealer told me that the venison body, the Scottish venison body, had a budget of, and I don't know if this is true, this is just what I was told, had a budget of £15,000 for marketing for the year. And I said to him, they might as well dig a hole and put that £15,000 in the hole, because £15,000 for marketing doesn't do anything. It's completely pointless if you compare to all of the other things that you're competing against. But I pressed him about the price issue, and he was just saying the problem is that we are being paid nothing, because of course they're a middleman, they're processing, but they're not actually putting. Some of them are different if they do some direct sales, but a lot of them are doing some processing and then handing it on to a retailer.
Absolutely.
And that retailer is making a massive markup but paying less or the same or whatever it might be. So I want to believe what I was told, because I hope that people don't lie. There's a lot of game dealers out there, particularly probably the smaller ones, or those that still exist, who they're also struggling because, on the other hand, they are suddenly being told, oh, you need to process 20 or 30 or 40% more deer than you did last year.
Yep.
Oh, well, how long is that going to last for? Well, I don't know. Like once the number's down, then it's going to come down. So hang on, you're saying to me I need to bring in more stuff, maybe expand a bit of my factory so that I can process 40% more animals for a business that is going to disappear in 3 or 4 years' time? Well, that's madness.
Absolutely, yeah,
Like,
it's crazy.
who can win? But that's government's fault. Like, that is government's fault implementing a policy without fully thinking through the consequences for the people who live in the countryside, for the wildlife, for animal welfare, and also just the economics of the countryside.
But I think a lot of it goes back to I think it's come up many times in many podcasts I've done. We've become very disconnected from the countryside, and most people would go into the supermarket and rather pick up a piece of chicken, or I was chatting to somebody the other day, nobody in Scotland really likes eating lamb, so they won't go for lamb, they'd go for a piece of beef or something like that. But they have no qualms as to where it came from, they just want something that's good value for money. Whereas things like pheasant, partridge, venison, if that was actually presented properly, it's absolutely phenomenal food.
It really is. It's criminal that it's not more available, particularly given how much there is of it. I mean, and I'm sure there's a lot of people. You're probably the same in the countryside who are like this. But I doubt there's maybe bacon in my freezer. There's now no longer a piece of lamb that I was given by a farmer because we just ate that at Christmas. I think everything else in there is venison, partridge, ducks, pheasant. I think that's it. That's the only stuff that is in my two chest freezers.
Sounds about the same, apart from a wild boar that I've still got some bits of that I got in Inverness.
Oh, fantastic! I am partial to a bit of wild boar, but that would be a good addition.
Exactly. No, absolutely. But that's
it's great food.
Yeah.
It's great food. It really is, and we should be eating more. We should be eating more pheasant and partridges. I mean, there's plenty of it. But again, we don't, just generally speaking, the public don't have a palate for it. It's smaller, it's more fiddly. I don't think it's any more difficult to cook. I mean, it makes bloody great curries with no effort whatsoever, just the same as chicken. But I have never actually looked. I wouldn't be surprised if by the time it makes the supermarket shelves, because of the extra processing, it's probably more expensive than chicken, is it?
It probably is, and it doesn't look as good. It doesn't look as plumped up,
No.
Because it's not pumped full of water and it's not cooked in
Exactly.
brought up in a broiler shed kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
and we could probably go on about this for a
we
long
could
time.
easy.
Let's drag you out of there and let's talk about Modern Huntsman. I think you're on volume 11 now.
Volume 11 is out, and Volume 12, we're a little bit behind with Volume 12, but it's about 3 hours ago I was on an editorial call about Volume 12, just putting the stories together. So yeah, that is still going strong in a world that is very hard for publishing. It's definitely not an easy arena to be in, like high-end, essentially book publishing. This sort of biannual publication that we have. But yeah, it's every volume I think gets better, and the caliber of writers and photographers that keep coming to the table volume after volume is always incredible.
Well, it's obviously a testament that you've managed to get to volume 12 now. I remember when it first started and you were talking about getting the first edition out, and you could do special offers and all the rest of it. But there you go. Testament says it's obviously a very good publication. You've got to 12 and people are still wanting to purchase it and pre-order it.
Yeah, it's been really enlightening as you get feedback over the last couple of years, and I think probably one of the most important things. So I mean, I should say that I didn't start the publication at the beginning. What you're talking about in volume 1 was I saw that there was a Kickstarter for it. I already had the podcast, and my brother and I invited Tyler Sharp, who's the current editor-in-chief of the publication, on the podcast to ask him, like, hey, what's this about? This looks cool. And we became friends after that, and then I ended up writing for the publication. Then I became much more involved in the conservation editor of it, and I've been involved in a lot of stuff ever since. So that was how it came into being. At the beginning, we were just a big supporter of it, and we bought a bunch of copies back when we sort of retailed it out of the UK. Now everything's shipped out of the US because it's a lot simpler. But one of the coolest things about it, the mission of that publication has been to bridge that gap in many respects. Write and print stories that could be read by anybody. Yes, it is a publication where you will read stories about hunting and you will read stories about fishing, but you'll also read stories about regenerative agriculture. And I wrote a story about commercial whaling.
Right.
So the spectrum is, and there's amazing chefs in there. The spectrum is vast, but it is anything that is to do with how we exist and also consume in the natural world. With a focus on the sustainable use of all of our natural resources. And we found that in the last, I would say 18 months to 3 years, there's a lot of Nat Geo, either actual Nat Geo photographers and writers or Nat Geo type people who are either published in the New York Times or the Atlantic or whatever it might be, coming to the publication because they're feeling like, and this is particularly true in the last 12 months, probably can't say too much on that, but there's a lot of these writers, I mean high caliber people, like the best in the world at what they do.
Yeah.
Like massively respected, award-winning, are saying, I don't know where the work that I want to do lives anymore.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of publications and outlets that have started to shy away from actual real storytelling.
Yeah.
And it's really sad because there are some journals out there that have been on the go for so long where they were the home if you wanted to read stuff, that sort of unseen world, and you could pick it up and you would read it and you're like, I'm getting an insight into the world I didn't know, like the no bullshit, serious journalism. And it's filtered. Like I know for a fact that a very big, probably the most well-known publication in the world for outdoors type or just human interest journalism canned 300 stories that were in the works in the last year. Some of those stories, some of the writers and photographers have been working on for 3 years.
Good grief.
And they just, and so I know what one or two of those stories were, and they're brilliant, like serious shit, like tackling the issue with elephant population numbers in northern Botswana and the hunting around that. That is like one of them. And it's just not palatable. It's like, it doesn't sell. And so we're going to can these stories, even though they paid for them. We want shorter form, clickbait type stories, because that's the arena that we're living in. And it's an incredibly sad state of affairs. And there's very few publications left that are doing this longer form, serious journalism. Hopefully Modern Huntsman is and can continue to be one of the places where that exists. But they are, rapidly decreasing by the day.
But I think we see it on every platform. It's like now Instagram that's my main platform, because obviously everybody got fed up with Facebook. Facebook's like your family, but Instagram, you got away with actually posting quality photos with information, and now all I ever seem to get is, we can't share this to your non-audience because blah blah blah. And we seem to be, you say about people wanting clickbait, it's almost rather make everybody happy and smiley and don't talk about the real world and don't tell them that there's actually something going on out there. But yeah, we're losing it. We're losing every platform. Even take away the hunting, just actual genuine facts are being diluted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was talking more generally, like right across the board about a non-diluted, honest, authentic journalism, and it's frustrating. And I'm working on a couple of projects this year with one or two different people, covering some pretty serious topics, and we're looking at inspiration for the type of filmmaking that we want to do for it, and looking at those films that exist, documentary films that exist, that we can use as a showcase to say, this is how it should be. And most of them are old.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of them are from the 70s and 80s. There's a couple of exceptions to that. Like, there's a recent documentary called Retrograde, which was by probably the greatest modern day documentary filmmaker / director, a guy called Matt Heineman. Retrograde is about the last 9 months as we've all pulled out of Afghanistan.
Okay.
And it's an incredible documentary. I think it's one of the best documentaries of the last 10 years. And it's a Nat Geo doc. So, good on them for like embracing that. I'm assuming helping fund it and getting it in front of people. So it's not that everything new is shit.
Yeah, but
it's just that there's a lot less good stuff. There's a lot of like ice road truckers, and
Yeah.
I live in Alaska or whatever the hell those shows are, and there's a lot less retrogrades out there.
But even when you look at that stuff, you look at sort of the Alaskan ideas and the stuff they do, it's so heavily edited that you don't actually, it's always a snippet, and you never actually see that what they were doing with the fish wheel or how they did that on the homestead or so.
Well, I don't watch that stuff, so I wouldn't know.
but
you sound like you do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just one of those things. It's you know what it's like. Aberdeenshire nights come in very quickly, so if you're not out doing something, you've got to watch someone else. But I think the world has become, very much just they want something. It's a quick fix. It's the happiness idea all the time.
It is, yeah. We need to get back to it. We need to get back to showing things that are true but not necessarily comfortable. And that actually was, I hope I'm not going to struggle to find a home for it, but it's one of my concerns about you mentioned the documentary that I've just finished.
That's just what I was coming on to. Let's talk about the latest thing.
Perfect segue then, because that is uncomfortable, because it is conservation reality. The premise of that story, which started back in 2019, was an elephant relocation from Namibia to the Democratic Republic of Congo at a time when Namibia was in its 7th year of drought. And it was devastation there. It was so dusty, and the game was just dying. And this reserve, the Okanyati Reserve, in Namibia, had a problem with their elephants because they had too many of them. Particularly, they had too many anyway, but particularly too many in a drought situation, and they were essentially destroying the habitat, what was left, for themselves and everything else that lived there. So they needed to find a home for some of them, and eventually they did. They were adamant that the elephants would not leave Africa because, believe it or not, there was offers from China, Saudi Arabia, and they wanted elephants, and they could have easily signed those deals, but they were like, no, our elephants are staying where they belong.
Okay.
A lot of people don't want elephants because the elephants are a pain in the ass. They destroy a lot of habitat. They're very heavy on the terrain, and unless you have a huge area, it's just really not suitable. And those places that want elephants probably already have them. So although the world thinks that, I think a lot of people would say probably, oh, they're endangered, we've almost lost them all. It's, yes, in places, they have lost almost all of them, if not all of them, in entire countries. But in places that have them, there's a lot of them.
Yes.
In dense density. So they found this home for them, and I went to document the story of this relocation, which happened by boat all the way up the Angolan coast. It was 3,500 kilometers up the Congo River, but into their new home. But the story actually ended up being, well, that was part of the story, and it was a big part. It was it's the thing that takes you from the beginning of the film to the end. The film is really about the main character in that, this lady called Netta Olofsson, who has this incredible life story that kind of starts when she was very young, and she got married to a guy who passed away about 15 years ago now, Jan Olofsson, and he was 28 years older than her. But they just had this incredible relationship that was entirely focused on conservation and for wildlife. And he was quite a well-known guy in his own right back then in the conservation space in Africa. if ever you've seen helicopters pushing wildlife into like funneled nets into the back of trucks, that's the Olofsson method of game capture, and he invented that back in the 60s.
Right.
So that's him. And I ended up being able to access a lot of the archival footage of all of that. But she's a really remarkable person, incredibly strong, but sensitive and at the same time in terms of her care for the wildlife in her charge.
Yep.
And so it became really a story about her and her fight to keep the animals in her reserve and look after them and the people that are there as well. And then there's an accident that happens not related to her but related to the story, which happens near the end of the film, but I won't give too much away. But that's essentially what that was. But I was very I really wanted to make something that pulled no punches.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
We lost an elephant on the way on that journey. An elephant calf died. Sadly, it happens. You know, if you try and do great conservation things and establish a nucleus of elephants in a country that had lost almost all of its elephants and they hadn't seen elephants for generations, and you do what they did, you're taking a risk. And if you don't take risks, you never win. Annetta says that in one of her interviews. You have to take risks to win. And that risk is sometimes people's lives because it's bloody dangerous doing what they do. And sometimes it's animals' lives, but it's not. And Alex is my friend. It's actually Annetta's son. He often quotes his late father, which is that it's not about the ones you take out; it's about the ones you leave behind.
Yes, yeah.
And if you're really a conservationist, the individual doesn't matter. That doesn't mean you don't care about animal welfare, but it means that your bigger picture is the continuation of the species. And this is what a lot of animal rights type organizations fundamentally cannot get their head around. So during that period of drought, yes, they were they got rid of a bunch of elephants up to Congo. They sold some various different species of antelope to other places that wanted them. They also shot a shitload of game.
I'm sure they did,
thousands,
yeah.
And turned it into meat, and it never got wasted. It wasn't like it was stuck in a hole. Like, people ate it. But they had to, because there is a limited amount of resources in a defined area. We're talking about a huge place. It's like 40,000 hectares, so 100,000 acres, like the same size as some of the biggest estates that we have in this country. So it's a massive place, but it's still a defined area. And so there's still an amount of resources there to be consumed by the wildlife that lives there. And you have to make these difficult decisions. I mean, there was a time where I think they had 2 trucks, low bed trucks, driving from South Africa to Namibia. And they live like 2/3 of the way up the country of Namibia, with lucerne on it every week to feed their game at huge cost to them.
Yeah.
Because like that was as Annetta says in the docs, the animals would get the shirt off their back.
Yeah,
they would get everything until they can't give anymore.
But I think people, exactly as you say, people don't see this picture. I can tell you can tell that story. You talk about Africa and all the rest of it, but it happens up here in the Highlands. There are stalkers out there that will go out in the winter and they roll out bales of hay to feed the reds if the snow is on the ground, because there is no food resource for them. And people are, but you just go and shoot them. It's like, no, but we actually look after them. We look after everything. The pheasant feeders are all out there feeding the roe. They're feeding the wild birds. It's one of those things. I think every keeper is naturally a conservationist, but gets tarred very quickly with the brush of just being a murderer.
Yeah, and a lot of that is because of public perception perpetuated by some. I'm not even going to use his name because of recent legal allegations. Not against me, but against people that I know. But because of high-profile individuals perpetuating lies, essentially, that it doesn't help. And if you have a platform, people believe you because you're the character. And if you have a platform, it's because you have people following you for whatever reason through your career. which means that you can say things that are not necessarily true and people are going to believe you because it's you.
Yeah,
And
no, absolutely.
anybody that has a platform has a huge responsibility. Any kind of a platform, actually, but obviously it means more if you've got millions of people that follow you, to really think carefully about what you say and what you do, because people are looking at you sometimes for guidance in a way of how to think, because not everybody's thinking for themselves. They're taking their actions based on people they assume or think must know more than them.
Yeah,
And
no.
just because you're a public figure does not mean that you really know what's going on, and you might just be perpetuating your own agenda or some sort of personal fight that you have against a certain way of life.
No, absolutely. And I think
I don't think I'm going to get myself into trouble with that, right? I've said no names.
I think you were pretty clear. No, there were no
Okay.
names mentioned, so we're good there. We're good. But going back to Africa, again, Africa's always one of those hot topics that comes up because all people ever see is national press throw things up about trophy hunters and stuff like that, whereas you've just explained a whole different side of it. To protect the species, you sometimes have to move things and shoot stuff, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I mean, interestingly, that place that I'm talking about is both a photographic tourism reserve and a hunting reserve in the same place. And I don't know what the numbers are today, but I know when I've spoken to Alex in the past and when he's podcasted with me, I think it was something like it took... And this is such a great case study because it's happening... We hear these numbers sometimes, but they're not necessarily in the same place. So they're not exactly directly comparable. So this is in the same location. 72 photographic tourists have to pass through their reserve to get the same level of income as a single hunter.
Yeah.
So you think about the feeding. By the way, those 72 people are being fed a lot by the hunters who are shooting stuff.
Oh, absolutely. No, totally.
Because it's all game that's on the menu. Obvious it is. Why the hell are you going to bring in sheep or cows or whatever when you have all this amazing game resource? It doesn't make any sense. That's 72 beds that are slept in with all the associated washing and energy usage, carbon footprint to get there on the planes and cars and all that, or one person that comes and hunts and shoots a dozen animals for the week that are going to be consumed anyway.
No, exactly. It makes no... It's a totally different world, but people don't get that.
There's place for both.
Yeah.
There's place for both, and they do both, and it's great. It's just that the realization, that sort of realization, and then acknowledgement that maybe there's something in that is very difficult. It's very difficult to get to a position to be able to have those conversations in the first place, and particularly from the hunting community, because that kind of stat example gets used a lot. Not that exact one, but very similar ones. And so it's seen now, just like I was saying earlier, like a propaganda message.
Yes. Just
the same as people who are vehemently against trophy hunting will also give you a bunch of stats, some of which might very well be true, I don't know. But then they're twisting that bit of data so that it serves the purpose of what they're trying to showcase.
But any bit of data put in the wrong context can be incredibly dangerous, and even just removing certain words from the data file can change it completely.
Totally. Yeah, it's a frustrating world we live in with that, where people... It would be great if... But that is the problem with statistics, of course.
Yes,
Statistics in themselves don't really tell you anything, because you have to really ask the question, who is giving me these?
The interpretation of the data is the most important fact, and if you interpret the data incorrectly, you can make things look drastic.
You really can. Yeah, you can. But Africa it seems to have cooled off a bit in the last year or two. But it's often the focus for anti-hunting sentiments, and I think it's because it's an easy target. Some of the most charismatic species in the world exist on that continent, some of which are huntable species, and people don't like that idea.
Well, Disney did a fantastic job of making them all doe-eyed and pretty, and of course that has had a huge effect on what people see.
It does. Although we were just having this discussion today because I don't know if you saw that some of the very early Mickey Mouse sketches just became public domain this week.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, because I think they're like they're 1928. I think the original ones.
Right.
So they've just become into this period where the sketches are public domain, so you can use the artwork without licensing. And in 1930, there was a cartoon or a sketch series, and I'm not entirely sure whether it was a cartoon or just a sketch series, of Mickey Mouse Goes Moose Hunting.
Oh, really? Fantastic.
Yeah. But unfortunately, it's not public domain yet because it's still got a couple of years. But as soon as it does, I think that would make a brilliant reprint.
Oh, totally. But I guaranteed it will be disappeared out the way somewhere.
I might try and find it now.
Yeah, I would say you need to get hold of that and hold on to it right now.
Yeah.
But because you've been up for several awards, obviously, with different things like the podcast and other videos. Oh, let's quickly dive back. Where will the Paid in Blood film be available?
Good question. So I did, just over the festive period, it's still ongoing at the moment, a sort of a pre-screening, which is not really a public release. It was really just some people supported me on that for post-production from a year ago. Some people from even further back than that. And I wanted a way for all the people who had given me money, and some of that might have even just been like $5, or some people who contributed a lot more, for them to be able to see it now that it was done. So I released a pre-screening, which allowed people to continue like supporting this last little bit of post-production, film festival submissions and stuff at the moment, which is still open, which is on my website, byronpace.com, under Paid in Blood. That'll close fairly soon because, like I said, that's not a public release. That's only for people who help support it. And the reason for that is that it's going into the film festival run this year, so it can't have been publicly released. And then at the same time as it's going through film festivals, and I don't know which ones it's going to get into yet because I'm literally only submitting this week.
All right, right.
I'm trying to find distribution for it on a mainstream platform, but it's a hard task. It's not impossible. But we'll just have to see. I would like it to live somewhere where everybody can watch it, and it would be great if it was a platform that people know, the name of.
I was going to say, yeah.
We'll see what happens. But it will be in film festivals this year, and whatever happens at the end of 2024, it'll be released in some way to the public. I just hopefully it's with a proper sort of distribution deal somewhere. But if they keep an eye on my Instagram, whenever there's film festivals that it does get into and it's showing, which should hopefully be in a couple of different places around the world, then I will let people know. So
okay, well, as I say, I'll put in the description your website link and stuff like that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
People to see. So you've also worked with some, well, as I say, some absolutely fantastic. I think David Attenborough you've had on videos with as well and stuff like that. Yeah,
Mr. Big D. What a gentleman he was. That was for a project. It's probably actually one of the last sort of projects I worked on with my brother. It was they've changed their name now. They're now called Wild Fish.
I was going to say it was something to do with salmon, wasn't it? Or something like that.
Yeah, it was for an organization. It was actually for the International Year of the Salmon, but the organization that commissioned me was Salmon and Trout Conservation, which is now called Wild Fish.
Right.
They do a lot of anti-salmon farming campaigning. Well, that's what a lot of their focus is now. So yeah, that was International Year of the Salmon, and somebody at the organization I was commissioned by had sort of some tenuous connection to him, and so he agreed to do the narration for this short 2.5-minute film that was really just to say, salmon are amazing, they're endangered, we need to support them. And we got the job to make that film. He agreed to do the narration. And actually on the bookshelf that's behind me, I've got a couple of letters from him because he doesn't do email.
Okay.
Or maybe he does now, but he didn't 4 years ago. And so in order to communicate with him, you either had to have his home phone number or write a letter to him.
Fantastic.
So I was writing, I think, 2 or 3 letters back and forward to arrange that a suitable time for us to come down and interview him in I think it's Richmond Park. That's beside that part. It's that part of London that he lives near.
Yeah.
And then eventually I got a letter back and he's like, here's my number, give me a call one evening.
Oh, fantastic.
So I gave him a call. It's only Sir David Attenborough. And we arranged it all, and I eventually went down and picked him up from his house. And we drove into the park and set up this interview. Well, actually, no, before that, we had a script, because it wasn't a very long piece, that I had written kind of in collaboration with the organization I was working for. I said, look, this is kind of what we need you to say, but in your own words. So we sat I've got a picture somewhere that my brother took of him and I sitting at this table in an office inside the park, like rewriting the script. Oh. So we rewrote the script, and then we went out and sat beside this pond and recorded it, and he delivered in true David Attenborough fashion.
Oh, absolutely fantastic! But it's things like that. Who would think that you started off recording a podcast and then you're recording things with like Sir David Attenborough?
I know, it's just it's kind of crazy, but he really was so humble and such a gent. It's like, well, who the hell am I? Like he was asking my opinion on lines on the script. It's like, does it really matter what I think? I don't think it does. But, and maybe he genuinely cared. I don't know. But it certainly felt like he cared. And it was just, there was no sense whatsoever of, I'm David Attenborough. Not at all. Like, he could have been anybody in that room collaboratively working on something that he wanted to be good. And that was really nice. And I got a chance to ask him, because at the time when I did that, I just started reading Sir Peter Scott, a lot of Sir Peter Scott stuff.
Oh, okay. Right.
All the old wildfiling books. And Sir Peter Scott famously started the WWF. A massive hunter. They omit that from his bio on the WWF website. Love to wildfowl. Also one of David Attenborough's best friends.
Yeah.
So I asked him a little bit about Sir Peter Scott, which was quite cool. And then we went and did the interview.
Oh, fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So, what is coming up in the future for yourself? Is there any new projects, any new things happening?
It's kind of an interesting point right now, because it's been the busiest year of my life, 2023. Finishing Paid in Blood was a big part of that, because unless somebody's made a feature doc before, I don't think they'll understand how much work is involved. It's just mind-blowing. But on top of that, I shot a short doc with a friend of mine in Chad about another relocation of antelope. And then I had a couple of other documentary projects in Tanzania and Namibia and Zimbabwe, and then some other parts of the world. So I was away a lot, but tonight, when I finish speaking to you, I've got one more edit to do to finish the last commitment for 2023.
Oh, fantastic.
And then my deck is, I think, completely clear of everything that I started in 2023. And I've never been in that position before. I've always had stuff hanging over me. So I'm looking into 2024, hoping that Paid in Blood does well, hopefully gets picked up somewhere, and then that acts as a catalyst and a springboard to do more of that kind of filming, because that longer form non-scripted documentary is very time consuming to shoot in the field.
Yes.
But it is the kind of documentary that I love to do. And whereas that one, until post-production, when I got some post-production funding help from very kind individuals, prior to that, I'd funded all of it myself, and a huge chunk of post-production as well. I can't do that again. I
was going to say that must be a quite. It must bite hard when you're having to shell out.
Yeah, it does. I mean, fortunately, I love what I do, and even if I was a multimillionaire, which I'm not, I would still do this. I would just pay more people to do things to make my life easier for me, but I'd still do this. And so for me, it was something I wanted to do anyway. But also I saw it as a sort of a career building exercise. You can pay to go and do a course on something to increase your knowledge base, or I go and pay to help myself finish a film, which is increasing my knowledge base and gives me something to then step up on. So I'm hopeful that something comes of that in 2024. and it will be like an ongoing process. But I'm just about to go to Brazil with a friend of mine who has got some funding for a feature film.
Oh,
Actually,
okay. Right.
A scripted. It's based on a true story, but it's a film which I am not shooting. But there's a documentary component of that, and then the initial like mood boarding and plates and stuff that are going to be shot to establish what this film can look like. I'm doing with him next month. So I'm really excited about that because I've never been to Brazil before. So we're going to be in the Amazon, which is going to be incredible. And then I have another cool project. Actually, a friend of mine who's been on my podcast before, Luke Oppenheimer, who was actually one of the very kind supporters of my film, helped make it happen. He's finishing his own project in Kyrgyzstan, a multi-year photography book project.
Okay.
His photography is insane. It's world class, like old school film photography that has heart and soul, like it used to, and what is lost in a lot of imagery today. And he tells me like half a dozen images that he still has to get for his books. He's flying all the way across the world to go and get, essentially, I mean, he'll take a shitload more than that, but essentially there's half a dozen images that he really needs. And I'm going to go with him to shoot a short doc. When I say short, I mean like 4 or 5 minutes.
Right. Yep.
On him about finishing the process. And it's going to showcase in an art gallery in New York in May, along with his work.
Oh, fantastic. Wow.
So that's the things that's on my table that I can talk about. And then I don't know. I'm trying to work out right now if I could tell any story, what would that be?
I was just going to say, you're not thinking of doing anything sort of back in Scotland, looking at the hill or something like that, or trying to put a story together out there?
Yeah, I'd like to. The Upland series that podcast series was a lot of work, and we were really fortunate to be able to get some resources to be able to make that happen. And I think a lot more could be done on that. The sad frustration about trying to do stuff like that at home is it's just like there's no money.
No.
And I'm not saying that because I'm like greedy and want to be paid lots of money. I just like literally there's none. Like I would love to be in a position where I can just, self-fund projects all day like I did with a lot of Paid in Blood, but I can't. And a lot of the things that if I wanted to make commercial film projects in Scotland, because some brands are selling a gun and they want a bit of advertorial type, let's make a slick thing or a rucksack or, pick your piece of item.
Yeah. I
can do it all year. I can have the meetings. Some of them would come off. I could make those films. But who cares? Like, I don't want to, and because I've done a lot of it in the past. Like,
no,
that's kind of how we
yeah.
built the business at the beginning. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. There's lots of people who enjoy doing that from a filming standpoint. I don't really enjoy it that much. I don't think I'm that good at it by comparison to like documentary work. But also, it's to sell a product, and frankly, it's kind of meaningless. It's very meaningful to the company selling the thing, but to the filmmaker, journalist that wants to do documentary, it's only a paycheck.
I was going to say, it's not the story.
How do you get?
Yeah.
It's not the story. So there are some brands out there, and I wish there were more, who are really willing to embrace the idea that they will support a story because the story is great and they want to be connected to that story even if it's not about the thing that they're selling. I would say like Mystery Ranch in the US are quite a good example of that. They do a lot of support of the wildfire teams.
Right.
There's been some short docs about the wildfire firefighters. And yeah, okay, like they're walking, they've got a Mystery Ranch rucksack on. But they're not doing overt, like how great is this and the zippers pulling and all that kind of stuff. It's just that they're supporting the thing because these people are amazing and they're doing great things. We support their work, and so we're supporting a story about it. Simple as that.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
And we need more of that here. So I would love to do more, but I'm not entirely sure how.
I think it's a tricky one because you watch social media as it is at the moment, and you've got, as you say, manufacturers get out there and do stuff. Now, I've seen some of the Scandinavian manufacturers have taken it to the next level, and they've done. It's almost a bit of a documentary, but it's a lot of product placement at the same time. But there's so much. I think we need to get more information back out there about what goes on. Yes, you can have the products in the background, but actually, well, let's look at the classic example is look at Clarkson's farm, what he's done for farming.
Brilliant.
Absolutely
Utterly
fantastic. Brilliant.
Yeah. And that's taking a slightly different mindset about it because, like, I mean, obviously Clarkson's a huge character and it's hugely entertaining, which is why it's been so successful. But in the hunting space, a lot of brands will want to make, say it's a rifle manufacturer, they'll want to make a film where somebody actually goes out and uses the rifle. We don't need any more of that.
No.
You know, we need documentaries talking about inappropriate tree planting in the uplands, or the impact of wind farms on peatlands, or what's going to happen when we do remove deer from the landscape. And yeah, maybe you could integrate some sort of rifle in that, but there's also, it's like, how much traction does that stuff get if you just release it as a short Instagram video or something on YouTube? I think for it to kind of be taken seriously, we need to find out a way to do a Clarkson's Farm type series that is in the mainstream.
Yes, yeah. It is because
it has the credibility then.
It has to be an estate, or it has to be something, or an individual to actually be able to go through the whole year explaining everything and showing not just the hunting side, but to show the whole process. Everything from, oh, look, they're building a new wind farm, or we've got cables coming through, or this, that, exact. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we need the whole thing. And I think it could be done really well. The characters are key, as they are with everything.
Absolutely.
You need strong characters that are entertaining to be able to captivate people, or people with a great story. I mean, I'd love to be part of that. It's something that I have thought about a lot over many years. I'm still not quite sure how to do it.
No, but these places have fantastic characters that have absolutely wonderful stories. But it's how you get them behind the camera. That's where most of them feel terrified. You point a camera at them, and that's it. Because I managed to get a guy who's a very good. He enjoys his cooking, and it all started during lockdown and all the rest of it. So he came up. He basically recorded a day on the grouse. He went out for his first stag with me, and he's produced some short films out of it. And I tell you what,
cool.
It really has gone down well for somebody who has a huge following that are basically foodies. They've actually seen the process, and that's actually worked really well.
Oh, that's cool. Who's that?
So the guy's called Alex, and he's the hunter-gatherer cooking on YouTube.
Oh, okay. I think I've come by it, yeah.
And if you go and search his YouTube channel, you'll see obviously my face on there quite a bit for his trip to. He basically did a trip to Scotland. He was coming up here to go and visit a salmon farm, and I threw a sort of a hand out to him and said, look, if you're coming to Scotland, why didn't you come up on the 12th of August, come out on the glorious 12th? Well, let's just say this year's glorious 12th was not a glorious 12th. It was absolutely miserable. So we got to test his kit out and see a very wet day, but we did walked up grouse rather than driven grouse. So really, really nice way of doing that. Took some grouse home, and the next day was absolutely fantastic. The weather came right. And it was a case of, right, we're going to stalk a nice bit of land. So we stalked out onto just south, an area just near Glenprosen. So
okay, right at the back of my house almost.
Pretty much. So yeah, about Balnaboth. We stalked up there, walked him round, got him into a herd. All we spotted to start with was hinds. Had him in, and I was like, well, we'll just take something, because it's your first ever deer, this was. And we got him in on a knobbler, and then all of a sudden this three-legged deer walked across. He got to take that. So in terms of the harvest, everything he did, it wasn't just pulling the trigger. There was a reason for taking that animal off the hill, documented it. I then butchered it up, packed it all up, vac packed it, sent the whole lot down to him. He's cooked it, barbecue, fire cooked it, and it's the process.
Totally. Yeah.
And that's, I think that's more important than actually just taking a guy and shooting the biggest stag on the hill.
Yeah, no, the more people can embrace that whole process, and I think we are moving more towards that. I think the modern kind of evolution of stalking is people more interested in. They're just as interested in everything that happens after the trigger is pulled as before, and that's great. Like that's a very positive move of what has happened in the last decade.
That's certainly what we want. And I get a lot of people asking, can they come out? Because it's the whole process. Pulling the trigger is a very clinical act. It's anybody could do that. Realistically, it's like shooting a piece of paper. If you say to them, just squeeze the trigger, bang. It's the lead up to it, the stalking, all the skill you require in the fieldcraft, and the extraction and the processing of the product, and actually being able to take that home now is getting more and more important to people, to be able to take that product home, that venison, and serve it to their friends and family.
Totally, especially with the price of food, which has become completely insane.
Yes, yeah. No, and to be honest, we've been looking at a spin on this, whether or not it's a way of you offer people, they come up for the stalk, but the package price is you get to take your animal away.
I think that's what we did when we were doing the hunts, and it makes perfect sense to me. I think that everybody who comes and hunt. The difficulty, as I'm saying that, I'm correcting myself. The difficulty is a lot of people who come and hunt in Scotland don't live here, and I mean don't live in the country of the UK, never mind not in Scotland. But if you do live here and you're coming to hunt, I think that they should just build it as part of the package price again, knowing that the Germans that come or the Americans that hunt, they're not going to take any game away. But when somebody more local comes and does shoot something, you should offer them the carcass. It should just be built into the business operations of the whole year. Most people are not going to take something away because they're not from the UK.
Yeah.
But those people that do, you shouldn't then have to charge them extra. And if they want a second one, great. Like charge them the carcass price for the game dealer. But just build it in, because it's not actually really about the money. It's more the mindset. I've always thought, and the reason I always started taking a lot of novices out was always because they could go back to London, they could sit in a bar, they could say to somebody, I went stalking to Scotland, I shot a deer, and then they can actually justify everything they did and explain the whole process. Whereas people would go, oh, you've just gone and shot Bambi. But they went, well, actually, no, the reason I did it... do you want to come for dinner?
Exactly. Do you want to come for dinner? You'll have some of the best tasting meat in the world. And I'll explain to you why I needed to shoot that particular stag, roe, whatever it was that they did take. And they can educate. It's kind of increasing your demographic of people that actually understand what's going on.
Absolutely. It's really important.
And I think I've seen a huge increase, and since a lot of the social media this year, a lot more interest in people either wanting to come up to stalk, take a hind, people from different parts of the world. So yeah, it definitely has worked.
Yeah, in a time where we are, as a society, apparently anyway, are becoming more conscious of our impact on the environment and the land, it is the perfect time to also embrace being part of the land more,
yes.
Which is really understanding where your food comes from and taking responsibility of where it comes from. I had a very interesting conversation with a vegetarian in Chad from France, part of the team that I was there with, and I just happened to be sitting beside her at dinner one night, and I couldn't understand why there was almost nothing on her plate. Like, this is we're in the middle of the desert, right? So this is like very rough cooking. Not a lot. There's no menu. You eat what gets put down in front of you. It's just like, well, you can not have the protein, but then you're just having rice with sauce. And we got into this quite deep debate because I was just curious. It wasn't an initial criticism. I just wasn't sure why she wasn't eating, why she barely had anything on her plate. And it came down to this like animal welfare aspect, and then, which I totally get, you can't really argue against that unless it's wild, unless it's wild resource, but you don't really know the animal welfare of a lot of farmed produce, so that's totally fair. But then when I started to dig a bit deeper in some of her reasonings, like so much of it was just completely logically flawed, because it assumed that she'd had no blood on her hands from the choices that she was making, but she probably had more than I did. And then once I started to feed her little bits of information, I think she suddenly had this realization. It's like, well, if that's my justification, I can't eat anything. And it's amazing how many people really just haven't really thought like that next layer down.
No, they don't. They don't, and I think that's society. It's not just it's a society-based thing. You could take it on all levels, even electric cars. They draw.
Don't get me started.
They draw a line, and that line says, once it touches my plate or I get in it, it's perfectly good. I'm saving the planet. But they fail to look back at how it gets to that point. And especially when you talk about the vegans, the vegetarians, there's no blood on their hands, but there's so much that they don't realise.
The doc that I would love to make, but I don't know how to get funding for it. So if anybody has any ideas or a bunch of money they want to give me to do it, that'd be great. Is on lithium mining and rare earth metals, because I've seen enough in different parts of the world that I've been in, some of which is where this comes from, because none of it's coming from here, or very little of it anyway. To know that I think a lot of the stuff that we're being told about the impact of batteries as a store of energy for green energy is bullshit.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like it's fundamentally flawed, and it's so obvious now that it's making me think. It's making me almost like err towards conspiracies, because some of it is just so out there to see the impacts and how it's just not going to work in the way that governments think it's going to work, that either they're stupid or there's something that we don't know, and somebody is making a lot of money out of pushing an agenda that cannot work. I think it's the latter. I think that like so many things, it starts with absolutely the best of intentions. I think that the best outcome is to embrace all. Like, I have solar and battery running my house. Okay?
Yeah.
But I think the battery cars are, for most people, a stupid idea. But that I'm not some sort of denier. I'm doing all the things that I can to reduce the impact and use all the renewables that I can. But also acknowledging the fact that super clean diesel engines, for a lot of people, are probably the most environmentally friendly thing that you can do. Running a car, owning the same car, I have a 1972 Series 3 Land Rover that I use.
I was going to say, do you still have that Land Rover? Yeah.
Yeah, I still have that. And I have another Land Rover from early 2000s that I hope to keep for the next 30 years if I don't get taxed off the road by some stupid policy. That car's been built.
Yeah.
That energy to build that car is now a sunk cost. The energy to build a lot of these lithium, and I'm just in the process, like I wish I could spew you a bunch of numbers to give you, but I don't. I've listened to a bunch of numbers. I haven't managed to log all this stuff in my head yet. But it's not cut and dry the way that a lot of organizations and governments are making out. It is simply not. And I think that we're going to end up crushing not just rural communities, but communities all over the country by ill-conceived and ill-thought-out legislation around hitting targets that don't make a lot of sense.
Well, I not quoted something the other day regarding China, and are they not opening one coal-fired power station? It was either a week or a month.
Yeah, I think there was a time certainly where they were doing that.
And you have to look at it and go, so the policy is to make the UK fully electric, ban all our fuel cars, which doesn't work for anybody that lives in the northeast or anywhere in Scotland. Well, yeah, pretty much the northeast of Scotland. Yeah. It's fine if you live in a town or somewhere where access to public transport is available, but up here, it's crazy. And then we've got the rest of the world that's still going, well, we're going to carry on making these for you, so we'll just carry on banging all your carbon out that you're stopping using.
It's also a pretty pointless endeavor prior to setting up a network that can actually charge them, and a consistent system for generating electricity, i.e. nuclear, that can power all of this battery-powered stuff. And then you look at it's a very old country with very old networks and very old towns, and a lot of people who own cars park their cars on the street. How the hell are they going to charge all their stuff without... I mean, I'll tell you exactly how they're charging it right now, with trip hazards over every pavement.
Yep.
That's how they're doing it. So, when is the Scottish government or the British government going to build a new nuclear power station? Because what happens when the wind stops, one day? Are everybody just not going to charge their cars? So it's just... I think electric cars are great. In town, they're brilliant. If I lived in town and I had a 9 to 5, I'd own an electric car and I'd drive that to work every day, and it'd be fantastic. But that's not the vast majority of people. And I don't think it's a solution for everything. And I think it's just like political point scoring to say, oh, we're going to ban combustion engines by 2030, now 2035, because they're already realizing how stupid the idea is, rather than saying there's a place for both right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, until we come with a hydrogen fuel cell or something, right now there's a place for both. And this, like, did you hear about what happened with the councils up here when they blocked in all of the fireplaces in all the council houses?
Yeah, there's
Bankery.
Yeah. So
this was 3 years ago. It was that other big storm that washed out the D.
And that would have been
big caravan site.
That's right. Yeah. That's the one
Which
that
one
went.
was that?
That wasn't Arwen, was it?
No.
It was before Arwen. We had the massive flood that came down.
Yeah.
Pretty much wiped out the D, all the bridges, everything. Relocated half of the D into fields.
It did, basically. Yeah. So when that storm, just prior to that storm happening in the months, just to encapsulate the stupidity of councils and governments, and just not living in the real world at all, just in their frigging ivory towers in the center of big cities. These council houses, because obviously they don't really have control other than legislation, which they're busy trying to put in, no new wood-burning stoves in some houses. But they don't have that much, well, they have less control over private-owned houses. So these were council houses, and a lot of those old council houses had open fireplaces or fireplaces that had been converted to wood-burning stoves already. And they decided that as part of their green agenda that no one should have fireplaces anymore. So they started, I don't think they finished the campaign, but they started to block in all these fireplaces. People couldn't have fires. Then that storm came. We lost power that year. I think I didn't have power for more than 2 weeks. It was in 2 different chunks, but it was 2 weeks in total. A lot of those houses, the power was for heating was electric. So the only way that people had to heat their house was the electricity, which didn't work, and the grid was down, or the fireplace, which was now blocked up.
Yep.
That kind of mindset, I think, encapsulates the incompetence of government here right now, and gives me so little faith in the people in power making decisions on our behalf. Because what kind of an idiot thinks that in fairly rural Scotland, it's not super rural, but it's pretty rural, where, storms might happen. Sometimes the power goes out. The power in the last 3 years has been horrific.
It's been horrendous, yeah.
It's unbelievable the amount of power outages that there's been. Like, my generator's been on loads, until it died. It's been on loads in the last 3 years. You would knowingly or incompetently put people's lives at risk by removing a source of heat in their houses is actually criminal. And I bet you those people probably got a pay rise.
Yeah.
Rather than losing their jobs.
But it went the same with Arwen. When we got hit with Storm Arwen, what was that, back end of 21, I think? Nobody knew that the whole northeast of Scotland was without power, in devastation. And I think it was only on day 7 it made national press. And suddenly, and more people knew via my Instagram feed down south. I had a chap send me 2 generators, palletized them, and posted them up, and said, if you can use these anywhere, please do.
Amazing.
But nobody knew that we existed up here. We were just without power and left.
Yeah, just abandoned.
Yeah. But there you go.
It's a symptom of a failing. It's the symptom of a failing system.
Yes, yeah. But
like
I think
that kind of example and that disconnectedness with the centre of Edinburgh or the centre of Glasgow, or any of the cities really. Although a lot of our kind of like Inverness is kind of it is a city, but it's barely a city. It's so rural. But that's where all the decisions and that's where all the votes are. And so you're having things being done to you without really. Without any real consideration how that's actually impacting people's lives. It's becoming very expensive to live.
But I think dragging this back into what we were talking about, this all goes hand in hand with the conservation issues and why the rural community and the way the country deals with the countryside is so poor.
Yeah. No, it is. And it's hard to know how to address that. You have to make your voice heard, and I don't know. Maybe we just need better relationships with our local MPs or MSPs.
But I think you've got a platform going forward that you've built over the last 10 years, which I think may well be that platform that gets more information out there. From what you've built and developed, I think you're the unbiased independent. That's why I was asking about whether you're doing anything on the home turf rather than the foreign turf, because I think the Byron Pace and Into the Wilderness and the Modern Huntsman and all of that way could be the face that the rural community needs to actually get us back on the map.
It would be nice if that was the case, and it is absolutely something that has been on my mind. And there's a very good reason why I went from, like I was saying right at the beginning of this, really quite a long time ago now since we started this podcast, when I was writing a lot of stuff in the field sports arena, where I pretty much have disappeared from it for the last 5 years in the UK in terms of writing and stuff. And it's because I realized that if I really want to make a difference, you have to be taken seriously by everybody.
Yeah.
And if it is first of all, acknowledge your biases. I'm not trying to hide where my journey to here, but I'm also trying to at least give myself the space where I could have a discussion on the 9 show, or I can create something that isn't immediately going to put people's backs up so that they'll at least engage with it and watch it. And it's very difficult to do if you're a columnist in the Shooting Times. And now you want to go and have a discussion with the broader public, because immediately you're a Byron Pace, weekly writer in the Shooting Times. Not that there's nothing wrong with writing in the Shooting Times, but it becomes a barrier. It absolutely becomes a barrier for you. Yeah,
you're tarred with a brush at the end of the day.
You are. Yeah, that's just life. That's just how it works.
Unfortunately, I think that's why it's like, if we could get you more mainstream, but we've got people out there that represent supposedly the field sport industry and community, but unfortunately I think, as you said, we talked about earlier on, it's the agenda based, it's the number of likes, the popularity, and that doesn't help us in terms of where we're trying to get a message across.
Yeah, I'm sure there's much smarter people about PR who, well, you would think that we would have embraced like a big PR firm now to be able to rectify that sort of stuff, but there's a lot of things to think about. But honesty, being willingness to discuss, being willingness to be wrong, like I said, I think is a great foot forward for any community that feels siloed or feels like there's other groups of people against them, not just the hunting field sports space, but any. If you can be the one to put your hand out and say, you know what, we want to change. I want to work with you. I want to work with you for a better future for everybody. Let's see if we can do that. Because while there's very, very loud people on both sides of any argument, the vast majority of people are silent and they're in the middle.
Yes.
Those are the people that you have to bring with you. And you can leave the unnamed, violently loud people to, I don't know, like shout in a dark room somewhere. But have a discussion with, people who are prepared to sit down and have a coffee with you or a beer.
No, I completely agree. And I think we've nailed this a few times now. So I think we're approaching the 1 hour 45 mark. I think it's
this is the longest podcast I've done in a long time.
I was going to say mine are normally an hour long, but I've had a couple of 2 hours. But I think what we'll do is we'll draw it to a close now, because I think we could probably talk all night. But I know you're
absolutely.
I know you're a busy man.
Well, I also got some editing to do tonight, so I'm going to go do that now.
So I'm very conscious of the time. So I'm just going to say, I think, fantastic. I will try and get as many links in there. If there's stuff I've missed, let me know. People can go and look at Byron's Instagram feed, go and visit the website, and thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Well, no, thank you. Oh, thank you for coming on, and it has been a long journey to get to this point.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for listening. I thoroughly enjoyed actually being able to interview somebody that I've listened to for a long, long time with the podcasts. It was really nice to get him on, and the wealth of knowledge and experience is outstanding. The things he's doing and some of the stuff that he's trying to get the education on is absolutely astounding. So we really do need to support, obviously, Byron and filmmakers like him that are actually getting the message out there, because I think that's what's going to change how people perceive the field sports and the things we do. And without supporting these guys and helping them build this platform, it's not going to survive. So looking forward, we've got our next guest, which is Jason Doyle, talking about Seeker deer in Ireland and some of the hunting he does. So that will be released shortly. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.